This time we will tell manhwa entitled Player from Today Onwards. This manhwa tells a story about a young man who hasn't awakened in years despite trying so hard. However, all his struggles were fruitless, but suddenly the main character is thrown into the past, to be precise in the age of Hero. Knowing that the main character has been given second life to reach his dream to change the world system that is unfair to the main character. So how is the continuation of the story of the main character who is struggling for each dream? So let's just start the storyline. This manhwa opens with the year 2020, which was a huge disaster for humanity, where a dimension appears that is connected to another world, which is often called a gate. Since the emergence of the gate of the peaceful world, it has become tense and full of tension. As a result of mankind not wanting humans to be in danger, all the governments in each country still sent many soldiers to check the gate. But no one came back, and from the other side the monsters start to attack and destroy humanity. And at the same time a human appears who gets a gift or from a transcendent called a sponsor, and someone who has got their sponsor is dubbed as a hunter, and with their existence humanity is saved, because with various kinds of strong powers they can fight monsters and avoid extinction. Among the many hunters divided into many manifestations, the Immortal Legion and the power of emergence flame mastery. He was called by the nickname Demon King. Unlike the other hunters, the Demon King is a player who is able to develop independently through hunting. And due to the existence of a very powerful Demon King, the Demon King is feared by 12 heroes who call themselves gods. The 12 gods finally, who were afraid of the immense power possessed by the Demon King, fought back and erased their existence. And after the deletion they found Eden. With the power of Eden they appointed hunters as the new human race and cast aside those who couldn't become hunters as slaves. And as a result of the actions of Eden, the world is completely controlled by hunters. And that life has been going on until now, in which someone who hasn't awakened will always be bullied like someone trash. The panel moves to the main character named Lee John is training with his teacher named Sungu, where it was revealed that Lee John had not yet awakened. But even so, Lee John does not give up and will continue to practice in order to get sponsors' attention so that he is given awaken. However, even though Sungu has been training for a year, there are no signs that he will awaken. Feeling that what he was doing was just useless, Lee John wanted to give up. Seeing this, Sungu immediately slapped him and reminded him of Lee John's promise that he wanted to become a hunter for the sake of being able to change the system of discrimination practiced by Eden and hunters. Sungu also said that he guaranteed that Lee John could become a hunter someday. Not forgetting, Sungu also reminded Lee John to always carry the books left by his parents. It seems that the book is very important, because it is the autobiography of the Demon King. Even though Lee John doesn't understand the book, he always carries it everywhere because this is an order from his teacher. In the middle of their conversation, suddenly there was an attack from above. Luckily, thanks to his trained instinct, Sungu managed to save Lee John. It turns out that the attack started with a woman, and when the figure shows itself, the woman is Eden, whose name is Athena. Knowing this, Lee John was very surprised, and why did one of the 12 gods come here and attack him? What turned out to be Athena's reason for coming here was to look for the Demon King's autobiography. One could see that Athena's strength was terrifying, which at a mere word made Lee John look down and terrified. Here Athena thought that the book was brought by Sungu, but before chasing it Athena felt that this lowly human had magic even though it was small. Feeling weird about this, Athena asked Lee John to give her the items she had hidden. Of course, the presumption was correct that that human carried the Demon King's autobiography. Knowing this, Athena was angry because a lowly human like her read the book, and as punishment Athena would kill her without mercy. And at the right time Sungu came and stopped the attack, even threw Athena to the far corner. Seeing this, Lee John was astonished at who was Sungu and why could he throw Athena, who in fact was one of the 12 gods. Sungu here doesn't say much because the situation is impossible. And here Sungu asked Lee John seriously, what if Lee John get a great power, whether he can change the world system as promised? At first, Lee John was doubtful because after seeing Eden's power, he lost confidence. But after seeing his teacher's gaze, Lee John was sure and would promise to keep that promise. Hearing this, Sungu just smiled and killed Lee John with his sword. Before Lee John really died, Sungu said, if you meet you, be nice to me. After hearing those words, suddenly Lee John entered a room and a yellow and white light emanated from his body. Then a system appeared and said that the Sky of Apocalypse sponsored it. And after that suddenly Lee John was in a mysterious place he didn't recognize. And when he feels his body, Lee John feels that his physique has become stronger, and most importantly, this characteristic indicates that someone has awakened and become a hunter. When looking at the area around, Lee John thought that this was inside a gate. And his guess was right because before long he met the goblin. Seeing this, Lee John was very frightened and hid, but after remembering Sungu's words he dared to attack. And thanks to his training for a year with his teacher, Lee John will practice for the first time. And unexpectedly, instead of hitting and taking the goblin's sword, it turns out that his punch alone succeeded in killing the goblin. Seeing this, Lee John couldn't believe that he could be this strong. After successfully killing goblins for the first time, a system pop-up appears informing you that the Sky of Apocalypse is watching you. And when remembering this, Lee John remembered that it was a demon king. However, the fun was delayed when lots of goblins came, especially the goblin chieftain. Seeing this, Lee John was very scared of how he could defeat the monster, and according to the data previously studied, the monster is at least on the level of a rank C hunter. Even so, here Lee John will not give up and will fight back. Them all, even if capitalized only Nekat. And finally Lee John came forward and slashed several goblins. With several goblins defeated, Lee John leveled up. And unexpectedly in the midst of the battle, suddenly the Sky of Apocalypse supports your decision and gives you a staff that has the power of fire. Knowing this, Lee John will make good use of this and move forward to be able to stab the goblin. And unexpectedly, with this weapon, Lee John managed to kill and level himself up. Of course, because it's already exhausting to make Lee John faint. And when he woke up, he was already in the hospital and being treated. One of the sisters there said that Lee John was very lucky because if there was no League Guild, maybe he wouldn't be saved. Hearing this made Lee John become dizzy and determined where he was and what year it was. The nurse replied that the current year is 2022. Hearing this, Lee John was in shock and couldn't say anything because he didn't expect to be thrown back in time. Where exactly is this year? Lots of special hunters have sprung up to make their names known. And this year is also known as the Year of Heroes. Knowing about this, Lee John immediately rushed from his bedroom and was ready to carry out his plan to change the discrimination system. So why is this time so perfect? Because if he can become stronger than the other 12 gods, then he can change the world for the better. But to be able to start the plan, he must heal first. And that afternoon someone met him. That man was a member of the association named Kim. Kim's arrival here is to ask who he is and why he entered the gate alone. Of course, the reason why Kim was interested in him was because after looking for information about Lee John, none of the data matched. Here Lee John said that suddenly he could be there. He did not explain that he was thrown into the past and only testified that he only remembered when he woke up there and did not remember anything about his past. Hearing this makes Kim interested, and we will meet another day. After Kim go, Lee John checks his status, and unexpectedly his status is the same as Demon King, namely player. Seeing this, Lee John was very happy because with this his plan could be achieved. And after several days in the hospital, finally Lee John was allowed to go home. Then after walking around, Lee John didn't expect to be in the Age of Heroes and in the center of the city where the strong hunters gathered. Shortly after that, he was approached by Kim and invited him to the association. Kim will provide a place to live there and create a new identity for him. And Kim also congratulated Lee John for becoming a hunter, one of the special hunters who succeeded in occupying hunter rank C in his awakening. And people like Lee John will get special treatment from the association, considering that people who are born like Lee John will definitely become strong hunters in the future. After arriving there, Lee John was surprised because he was given a good place to live and some qualified facilities. Besides that, Kim also said that there was someone who wanted to meet Lee John. Finding this, Lee John was shocked and asked who was someone who knew him. And when he met this person, he was the guild master of the League Guild named Sun Gu. Seeing this, Lee John couldn't believe he could meet his teacher. And here, Lee John just remembered what his teacher said in the future before he was thrown into the past. And when concluding this, Lee John thought that this was made by Sun Gu. And of course the reason Sun Gu sent it to the past asked him to keep his promise to change the world system for the better and for peace. Now, because Lee John couldn't explain all of this here, he immediately had the theme of love for Sun Gu for saving him. The next day after resting, Lee John was told to go to follow the Novice Hunter tutorial. This activity is made to find talented Sook hunters who can be recruited by the association to help bring this world to peace. And the trainer who will oversee this tutorial is a B-rank hunter named B Sang-soo. It can be seen that the hunters are very enthusiastic about the activities this time, because if they pass they can easily enter the main guilds in this country. Before doing the tutorial, Sang-soo asked several hunters to explain the purpose of the sponsor giving great power to hunters. All hunters cannot answer because this question is still mysterious and there is no explanation yet. But at that time Lee John said and thought that the sponsors provide power for the purpose of entertainment. Like in Game World, they choose a character and watch that character grow. And here Lee John got this answer after seeing the struggle of the Demon King. Soon the tutorial starts. The tutorial is quite simple, where one by one the hunters will fight the prepared goblins. At first this made all the hunters worried because there was no way they could face the goblins alone. Sang-sun only said that everything would be fine because the goblins had been brainwashed and could not kill humans. And to convince them all, Sang-sun is also a blessing. If something unexpected happens, he will come down to help. With that the official tutorial begins. It can be seen that some hunters succeeded and some also failed. And now it was Lee John's turn. Different from before the goblin that Lee John was fighting was a rank level goblin. Everyone who saw this was in disbelief, and how could a novice hunter defeat the monster? Here Sang-sun said why Lee John had to face a rank C monster, Even though Lee John is a novice hunter before, he managed to defeat a rank D dungeon boss alone, so even though this is difficult, he can definitely do it. Shortly after the duel begins, Lee John immediately attacks with his spear. You can see that the spear managed to stab the goblin's arm. Unfortunately, the attack had no effect whatsoever and the goblin attacked back to corner Lee John. Seeing this condition, Sang Sun intends to help, but unexpectedly Lee John shows an agile movement that manages to avoid and overthrow the goblin very easily. Seeing this, everyone couldn't believe how a novice hunter could beat a sea-level goblin. And because of his great strength, his spear weapon was destroyed because suddenly it could withstand its power. In the afternoon, Lee John was visited by Sun Gu and Kim. Before we move on, we're shown the interesting thing that Kim isn't own person men but women. And now the association party has pointed to Kim as an assistant from Lee John, which Sun Gu met him only offered him to join the League Guild. Got this offer, Lee John refused his offer. Not because of arrogance, because to carry out his plan he can't get close to Sun Gu or with others. Because if you force it to enter, it will make future plans chaotic. Even here Lee John refused, but if Sun Gu need her help she will help him. Hear this, Sun Gu happy and will let him know if he needs help. The story continues with Lee John and Sun Gu who are talking about something. Sun Gu told him if he needs help I will be happy to help you. I don't know why, even though they just met, they are already familiar like a brother. The next day Lee John attended the tutorial pass exam which was being held today. The exam will be held inside the gate. But beginners don't need to worry because as a rank B hunter will guide you all together. Without further ado, they immediately started the trial by entering the gate. There they were surprised by the humidity that is different from usual. This is because there is a density of magic in the game. The leader directly guides the beginners down the path. When meeting with Monster Goblin, the chief gave instructions for the rookies not to be careless and attacked with caution. Then when it was Lee John's turn to get an attack instruction, he dashed swiftly forward. With the speed and spear in his hand, he managed to split the goblin in two with one move. Lee John's speed and acumen impressed all the beginners, while the chief thought that Lee John's strength was close to B rank. Of course, after this trial, he intended to recruit him. Next, they finally arrived at the boss dungeon area. The chief asked all the beginners to prepare potions and all equipment. That way they can fight the dungeon boss with maximal strength. Meanwhile, on the side of Lee John himself, he thought about the Demon King who had the ability of a player. Even before that power was tested, he died at the hands of 12 heroes. If the Demon King grows stronger than them, then such an incident would not occur. Lee John is determined to utilize all his knowledge to become strong to be able to change the incident. After entering the boss dungeon area, everyone was surprised by the level increase, so they are a little worried about what kind of boss they will fight. The chief then asked all the newbies to quit. Then from the front appeared huge fire magic ready to hit them. Of course, the chief cannot avoid it and tries to block the fire magic with his Viper's Fang skill. Even though the chief managed to block the attack, there were a few flames that managed to get past him. Surprising from behind, Lee John managed to stop the remnants of the flames. That way all beginners are safe now. After blocking the remaining fire, a notification appeared from a sponsor named the Sky of Apocalypse asking Lee John to kill the Goblin Archmage boss dungeon. This goblin is different from the others because its special power is long-range fire magic. So the only one who can fight him is the chairman. Different from the others because Lee John received a challenge from sponsor. He immediately asked the leader to hand over this dungeon boss to him because this is a beginner's tutorial. Of course, since it was Lee John's wish, the chief couldn't hold it in any longer. Assassination mission begins. Lee John was on alert while analyzing the movement of the opponent. Then from the front, the goblins issued 3 high-level fire magic. But Lee John smiled until he raised his shield. Surprisingly, the fire actually absorbed Lee John's body. After getting the gap, then Lee John headed forward, but he was blocked by barriers so he couldn't go forward anymore. Even though Lee John couldn't advance, it seemed he had another way of being able to fight against that huge flame. Lee John then raised his spear and said split. Instantly the fiery aura on his spear staggeringly split the barricade of goblins. Next Lee John charged forward at breakneck speed. Then with his fiery spear he managed to stab him until he was killed. Mission completed. Finally, sponsor is impressed with your performance. Due to the Sky of Apocalypse sponsoring Lee John, he gets one chance to summon Avatar. After the exam ended, the chairman immediately reported to the chairman of the association that Lee John was a very talented super rookie, and his potential could be used for the purposes of the chairman of the association. Of course, the chairman of the association immediately asked to recruit him. Meanwhile, Lee John, who had just left the building, was greeted by Kim and Sun Gu. Sun Gu asked if any guild had recruited him. Lee John replied that yesterday's chief examination had recruited him, but he rejected it. The reason why Lee John doesn't want to join any guild is that he avoids someone in the association. If he enters a guild, then his identity can be exposed. Then instead of thinking about that, Sun Gu invites Lee John to dinner for his first success. After returning from the party, Lee John again analyzed his strength by opening the start menu. It says Lee John's level is already level 11, and he is given the opportunity to summon Avatar, where there is no normal hunter who summons avatars, even among 12 heroes. Only a few can do it. Of course, out of curiosity, Lee John tried to summon his avatar, the blue aura in his body, but we haven't seen what Lee John's avatar looks like. Furthermore, Lee John was surprised by Miss Kim reporting that Lee John was included in the headlines, but his identity was not really published. However, as usual, the stiff Lee John immediately asked Kim for one request. A request from Lee John was to prepare a dungeon. The next day, Lee John immediately cleared the dungeon prepared by Kim. Even though Lee John was alone, but monsters like goblins seemed to be very easy to beat. And surprisingly again, in the past few days, he has completed 4 dungeons at once. Sky of Apocalypse is happy with your performance. How could it not be that with his hard work today, Lee John was able to level up? This is where we just found out about the avatar that was previously summoned by Lee John. It's the avatar is a skull bracelet. Previously he had thought this avatar's effect was devouring monster souls. After defeating monsters in the dungeon takes no effect. Furthermore, Lee John asked Kim about the next dungeon. Kim explained that all dungeon it's been rented by a guild called North Army, a newly famous guild for some time. It was said North Guild had rented up to 20 lowly dungeons as training. Realized that matter, Lee John asked if the guildmaster of the North Guild was Choi Young-sum. Kim replied, yes, he is the one. Before Lee John came here, Choi was a super rookie, and now he forms a pretty strong guild. That instant Lee John felt shocked because Choi in the future will become famous for being under 12 heroes. In the future, Choi is nicknamed War King Gunther. In the future, Choi is a very bad person. How could he not be willing to kill many people for his own purposes? And the biggest incident of it is half of the villagers Lee John was destroyed by him. The next day, while on the road, Lee John finds 2 oppressive hunters trader. Of course, he did stop the stupid act. That delinquent felt he was right, then he blamed everything on him. Lee John. See the fight there. Ban, it immediately launched its first attack. However, Lee John managed to stop it by throwing it backward. Then the other person uses a weapon that should be banned by the association. Of course, Lee John, who was very fed up with him, immediately punched him so hard that he fainted. After Lee John requests Kim to bring these 2 people to the association. Here Kim said that the 2 people were from the guild North Army, which means they will definitely do something to Lee John. Exactly 2 days later, Lee John called to the association after being accused as one of attacking the merchant. This is due to the merchant providing the declaration to the direct associate. Of course, there Lee John felt confused about what the middle-aged man was doing, but he was calm so as not to be mistaken for the perpetrator. After the debate along there, because it does not meet the end, Lee John immediately gave evidence of the actual recording. With that, finally, the problem was solved. When Lee John recorded the incident, he had recorded it before going to the old man before being bullied. Because in the future Lee John once experienced such fact reversal. So by repeatedly experiencing like that now, it's customary to record first as evidence later. In front of the building, Kim and Sun Gu were already waiting for him. It wasn't long after that man, the middle-aged, came to Lee John and apologized for the statement earlier. He did all that because his son was threatened by the North Army, so he had to do it for his son to be safe. Hearing this explanation, as Guildmaster League, Sun Gu will be responsible for his safety. Then in front of Choi, his manly came to Sun Gu and shook hands with him. Because of his overflowing emotions, Sun Gu didn't purpose breaking his finger. Sun Gu says, if Choi bother Lee John again, then I will be your opponent. The next day, Kim got the news that the North Army had solved yesterday's problem by paying only a fine. Of course, this is very rotten stuff. However, Lee John already knows that because in the future Choi is the most rotten person. For now, Kim said that the North Army is not doing any movement. Lee John realized something strange here because the North Army is not like that. Gunther is a figure who is destined to be a cold and heartless slayer. He definitely will reply defeat it's in time near, said Lee John. For now, Lee John asked Kim to keep an eye on him if there is any new information he wants to know. The next day, in order to grow to be strong, Lee John asked Sun Gu to do a raid together. The reason why Lee John asks for help from Sun Gu is that will be entered Lee John this time is in dungeon high class. Actually, Lee John wanted to learn strength from Sun Gu, who already had a lot of experience. Elsewhere in the residence of the North Army, there was an argument from the founder, namely Choi's younger brother named Yang-Su was very angry that Choi didn't move at all. On the other hand, the man in armor named Jiang Incheng asked them all to calm down, because we have to solve internal problems first. Due to their opinions, Yang-Su and Incheng were different until they were about to fight. Luckily, Choi stopped him and asked Incheng to agree with Yang-Su, because if they don't reply to Lee John, then the North Army Guild's pride will be lost. Let's go back to raid from Lee John and group of Sun Gu. It was clear that the strength of Sun Gu's group was very strong and had a good strategy. However, the most conspicuous was Sun Gu himself, where with that greatsword covered in the aura, He could kill 5 monsters with a single slash. After displaying his strength, Sun Gu asked Li Jian to show his strength. Then with shining eyes, Li Jian headed forward with Orave Blue. Then he shot his spear in the direction of goblins surrounding. As a result, in an instant, he can kill everything. Suddenly all the hunters who saw it was very surprised. How come to Li Jian used skill without casting spells? Sun Gu told them that it wasn't skill but authority. After the dungeon cleared, Sun Gu made another offer. Li Jian wants to join his guild. If always Li Jian joins, so Sun Gu will give group deputy guildmaster. As usual, Li Jian refused for the same reason as before, but he did not reveal it. Not long after that, a notification appeared from a cell phone. Order it written that the Hunter Association requires 100 hunters to clear the gate. This message came from the North Army. Li Jian and Sun Gu realized that this was a trap, but it seemed Li Jian is increasingly interested in participating in the mission. Elsewhere, Incheng is very annoyed with the mission because he doesn't know that the guildmaster will do all this, where he didn't expect that his 2 childhood friends, namely Choi and Yangsu, changed his attitude being different toward all citizens. Now they're just eyeing position just the highest, not the same as before. Although he's had them both already can't be saved anymore, Inking can't leave him. On the anxiety, he got a call from Li Jian. Of course, because he was worried, Inking agreed to meet somewhere. Arriving at the appointed place, Inkang immediately informed Li Jian to retreat from the mission this time, because this was Choi's trap. As usual, Li Jian gets around Incheng to provide information. Even Li Jian is a bit insulting to the guild, by saying that the North Army Guild is the Chaos Guild. Chaos Guild is a guild sponsored by evil beings. Got the insult, Incheng very angry and released a large killing aura. But after Li Jian said that Guild North Army can be rotten after meeting someone mysterious, immediately it was direct. Inking stopped the intention. I don't know what happened in the negotiations. Incheng back to the guild. Inking also asked who Li Jian actually was. Meanwhile, Li Jian thought that he could bring Incheng to his side, because in the future, Lime is a famous hunter. It is even said that he has killed the Avatar Demon King and also a famous monster. But in the end, he was killed by Choi Yangsu. But the problem is that although he is very strong, his resolve is very weak. And why the North Army can survive in the future is because Incheng is balanced in the guild. During his battle against the Limp a few days ago, Li Jian realized if strength was not enough to match it. Until now, Li Jian trains to strengthen his physique and strength again. After killing lots of monsters of dungeons, surprisingly his spear was destroyed. So he decided to go to the most famous blacksmith's workshop in the future. However, at this time, this red-haired forge still had a small business. This man's name is Park Yi-hyun. In the Demon King's book he said if Park Yi-hyun helps the Demon King to the end, then history will definitely change. Initially, after seeing there's someone come here, Park feels strange to Li Jian come here. But after Li Jian explained that his arrival here was because of the sponsor, Park had no doubts about Li Jian again. The problem is Park can't make his equipment because he's not satisfied with the fire in this place. However, Li Jian will help him overcome the fire with his magic. Park was very surprised because the fire magic from Li Jian was high level. A week later, finally Park succeed make a very good and deadly weapon, a spear that can be strengthened with fire magic. The greater the fire it receives, the stronger this spear will be. Well, that's all the story for today. Next, Li Jian will study spear newly as Li Jian can defeat Choi in future missions. Thank you and sayonara.